Stories that are so incredibly powerful, stories that grab hold of us. Yes, that is one of my favorite movies of all time, and yes, I did see it on opening day in spite of being in ER earlier that day. I love those books and those movies, and there's something about them and about these stories of hope, of power, of strength, of defying the odds, of overcoming that resonate deeply within our souls, that we get excited about the stories, and some of us are hoping for one of those great stories later today. All right, yes, there is a football game later today. But some would say that a happy ending is the mark of inferior art, of inferior storytelling. That life is not like that. That life rather is more about paradox, about irony, and true art should be marked with a sense of frustration. This is an insult or a criticism sometimes lobbed at Christianity, that Christianity is too pat or escapist. And that kind of storytelling is fine for children's books. You don't want to give them nightmares, but not for adults. Adults should have more refined tastes. J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of Lord of the Rings, wrote this, and yes, I put a typo in there. The joy of the happy ending is not escapive nor fugitive. It does not deny the existence of catastrophe, of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary for the joy of deliverance. It denies the universal final defeat insofar as is good news, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world. He goes on to argue that people sense that such stories touch on a deeper thread, a deeper reality, pointing to some underlying reality that is a current that is underneath everything, that there's some great underlying reality to which all these good stories of hope, these fairy stories point to. In the epilogue to the essay on fairy stories, he writes, the gospel story is not simply one more great story, pointing to the underlying reality. Rather, the gospel story of Jesus is the underlying reality to which all stories point. And as we embark into chapter 5, we encounter the battle scene. We encounter these situations where these glimpses of joy pop forward, and we go, wow, they excite us, these acts of restoration, of hope, and in the midst of hopeless and desperate circumstances. Chapter 4 ended with Jesus taking the disciples on a little boat tour. And a storm comes up, and Jesus calms the storm, and then they land. In the area of the Gennesarenes, there's something much more desperate, much more scary than what was on the lake. And that is the sort of sense that marks the entire chapter. Let's jump in there with verse number 1 in chapter 5. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. You just got to pause there for a second. I lived in a parsonage. That's a house that's owned by the church once, and it was on the church property, and it was surrounded by the cemetery. That was creepy. This guy's living in tombs, like with bones and stuff. No. This is like horror movie stuff. For he'd often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. I think I might be reluctant to go to a funeral here. Like Like, naked crazy guy might show up at grandma's wake. This is not a pleasant place to be, and this is not a guy that I want to deal with. And yet Jesus shows up. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Wow. What a story. And I'm not going to finish it. You're going to have to go to the book of Mark, chapter 5, to read the rest of it. Some of you may have heard that story before, but it sets the scene for this entire chapter. And this chapter is about Jesus' encounter with three desperate, hopeless people. And the challenge in desperate and hopeless times is to bear up under the difficulty. To bear up under the difficulty without giving up or giving into bitterness. And that's something that's familiar. We've all seen that. Someone who has gone through difficult stuff and become bitter because of it. Someone who's gone through difficult stuff and has given up on everything. It's difficult to continue working, to continue striving, to continue to bear up when gratification is delayed. Can anyone say Matthew Stafford and 10 years in Detroit and go Detroit Rams? No, I'm kidding you not. There's a suburb of Detroit, Livonia, that has started making Detroit Rams t-shirts because it's been so long since the Lions have done anything. What's difficult is bearing up under difficult situations, taking what life offers, and suffering through difficult stuff without lashing out. That's patience. That's trusting God. And that's the kind of thing that redefines you, that transforms you by the power of God at work in your life. And that's what God can do to us even when we face the most difficult things. So let's jump ahead and jump down to verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by a boat, it's just a little boat tour. To the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. This is an incredible scene. And one that we don't always get right away, because here Jairus is a man of authority, a man of prominence. This is someone that would send someone else to Jesus to make a request of him and not go himself. But here you get this picture of Jairus, this distinguished man, running up to Jesus and getting down on the ground. This man is desperate. And what he's really saying here is, Jesus, unless you come, my daughter is as good as dead. If you don't hurry up, if you don't show up, there's no hope. Can you imagine the insides of Jairus as his insides are just churning with anxiety and grief and horror as he's run and laid down in front of this Galilean carpenter? This wasn't somebody distinguished. Jesus in that day and age didn't look like a doctor. He wasn't somebody that you went to with something like this unless you were desperate. One of the things I think we sometimes miss about Jesus is when we think about Jesus, we think that Jesus was some sort of heirloom carpenter. Like Jesus invented table and chairs and made nice little things that went in houses. You've never been to Nazareth. there were no trees. It's rocks. He was a carpenter in the sense that he built houses, and he built houses out of stone. Jesus was muscle. Jesus was the labor. And so here you have this distinguished person running and laying down at the feet of Jesus in complete desperation. But before Jesus can really get going with him, a large crowd followed and pressed around him. This is crowd like went to a concert and it's not chairs, it's open seating or standing. And everybody's up against the front of the stage. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she got worse. So not only has this woman suffered from her disease, she's suffered from the doctors. Everybody that she's went to hasn't helped her. They've made her more sick. And her situation has gotten so desperate and so helpless that she's got nothing left. She's got no family, no community. Because of her disease, she's not welcomed into the community. Probably she's living on the outskirts of town. She, like the woman at the well that Jesus meets in another story, goes when no one is around to draw water because no one wants to be near her. And so she braves the crowd. She comes into the crowd, a place where she wasn't welcome or wanted, in order to get near to Jesus to touch his clothes. It is an act of sheer desperation that brings her into the crowd to come after Jesus. When she had heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she had been freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" Who touched me? Who touched me? Jesus, are you kidding? There's people everywhere. Everybody's touching you, Jesus. Why are you asking this? You see this scene, and can you imagine Jairus' anxiety? The situation is serious. Jesus, if you don't hurry, you're not going to make it in time. Can you imagine the disciples' irritation? And in the middle of it, Jesus' complete patience and composure. You see the people crowding around you, his disciples answered, and yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. So not only does he ask it, he stops everything. Like, okay, nobody move. We're not going anywhere until somebody fesses up. All the time, the disciples are going, let's go, Jesus, let's go, Jesus. It's like trying to get your kids ready for school in the morning. Put on your shoes. That's how the disciples are feeling with Jesus. Like, why aren't we moving? This woman has a chronic condition, whatever, and they don't even know the story yet. There's a daughter that's dying, and it's acute. It's an emergency. We got to go. And Jesus won't be hurried. What Jesus is doing here is almost irrational. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet. Trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Not only does Jesus want to know who done it, he wants to hear the story. He wants to know everything, and it is utterly irrational, utterly crazy. It verges on what they would call malpractice. Like, if you were in an emergency room and you stopped to deal with this lady while someone was dying in the next room, you'd be sued for malpractice. And yet that is what Jesus is doing here. After he hears the whole story, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told them, "Don't be afraid, just believe." How do you think Jairus feels about Jesus now? Can you imagine the grief? Can you imagine the sorrow? Can you imagine the anger all mixed together? Has anybody ever talked to someone that's feeling that way towards you? That's hard. And yet Jesus looks at him and says, "Trust me. Trust me. Be patient. There's no need to hurry." In other words, what Jesus is saying is I won't be hurried even though I loved you. No, what he's rather saying is because I love you, I won't hurry. I know what I am doing. The reality is that God's timing will always confound us as people. It will never come when we want. His love, His grace, His healing, His restoration doesn't work on our schedule. And when we often try and hurry it up, we mess it up. And the reality is that's the way it is that God works on His time when everything comes together according to His plan, not according to ours. There are some people in the world that time is, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. Those that kind of grew up with a sort of military background. I did a wedding at St. John's, and this was the couple. Military husband, wife that lived on island time. And I remember sitting in the sacristy, and I was there with him, with all of his groomsmen, 20 minutes before the service was to start. Over an hour and a half later, I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know that she's coming, man. She did come, and they got married, and it was fine, and everything was good. But you could see, you could look out and you could see the sides of the congregation. The side for him, everybody was there ready to go, and they're looking with longing glances over at the other side as people keep trickling in. But Jesus, in the middle of our varied views about timing, knows the right time, the perfect time to show up, to heal, to restore, and He shows up in the way He needs to, in the way He needs to reveal who He is in His love and His grace. And He doesn't look at anyone as more important than anyone else. He looks at and loves each and every one of His children. It's almost in the middle of this that He's saying, look back, remember the lake? Remember the storm when you thought you were going to die? My grace and my love are compatible with going through storms. They're strong enough, they're stronger than, they're more powerful than the things that you will face, the chaos that you will deal with in your life. My love and my grace is not invalid because you go through them. And my love and my grace will carry you through. Story continues. Did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. This is something I kind of wonder about, something that's come up a couple of times in Scripture already, where Jesus shows up to a place and he can't do much because there's little faith. And so here Jesus in this scene only takes those closest to him. He did not, when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they laughed at him. Us who know the story look at those people and think, well, you shouldn't be laughing at Jesus. You know he's God, right? And these people here, they have good reason to laugh because they know what a dead child looks like. And they're looking back at Jesus and just saying, no, she's not mostly dead. She's all dead. And so it's this hopeless scene. And Jesus isn't afraid to walk into hard stuff, both for them and for us. After he had put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went to where the child was. Jesus tells us something very important here that's kind of a side point, but I think it's something worth noting. It's okay to put out those that stand in the way of Jesus in your life. There are some times when focusing on Jesus and what he's doing in your life is important enough to put out the ones that are the naysayers, to put out the ones that are getting in the way, to put out the ones that are stumbling blocks and are going to lead you away from Jesus and his will and his way for your life. Because Jesus has more important things for you than what they want to trip you up with. After he put them all out, I already read that one. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. She gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. A couple of things there. When he says Talitha cum, he's using a pet name, an endearing name. It's almost like some would say honey, or like I call my kids Critter and Sis. It's what I call them. And so when I call them that, they look, because they know that there's only one person that's going to call them that, and that's me. And so when Jesus is doing this, he's doing something so tender, so gracious. It's almost like waking a child up from a nap. I have a 2-year-old, monster when he wakes up. And so you want to do it very, very gently. And so that's what Jesus is doing here. Speaking tenderly, speaking kindly. And he's saying, just stand up, like wake up from a nap. He says, arise. Get up. The other thing to notice that is something I think is interesting is when you get really sick, usually you're not hungry. And that's because your body saves all of its energy for fighting whatever is going on. And so some medical people even say, simply bringing someone in the hospital and stopping them from eating heals them because their body is able to do what it needs to do. And so here, when Jesus tells them to give her something to eat, he's saying she's completely well. She's completely restored. She needs food again because her body can handle it. She's been completely healed and is completely well. It's amazing to think about this story. All these stories together. Jairus came looking for a fever cure, and he got a resurrection. Jairus came to Jesus just needing to trust Jesus long enough to get him back to the house. But Jesus asked Jairus to trust him more. To trust him for everything. To trust him past the fever cord. To trust him more than that. To trust that he has power even over death. See, when Jesus shows up on the scene, we often have to give more. But he also gives us more than we could ever imagine. It's almost as if Jesus is saying to us here and now, in this scene here at the end, is if I have you by the hand, death itself is nothing more than sleep. And he invites us to hang on to his hand. To trust in him, to keep our hand in his no matter what life faces. I grew up for quite a while. I was in Colorado Springs, and we would go and watch the fireworks at Monument Park. It was a park with a great giant lake, and Colorado Springs, like here, things like to catch on fire. And so they'd launch the fireworks over the lake, so the fireworks would land on a barge in the lake and nothing would burn. And so it was a great place to watch the fireworks. It was phenomenal. And I was walking with my parents and my two little sisters. My little brother, Bo, wasn't born, or not Bo, Colin, my son, my brother's name. Micah wasn't born yet. And I let go of my dad's hand. And I still, there's very few things that are vividly clear in my memory. But I let go of my dad's hand to bend down and tie my shoe. I still remember they were faded blue Chuck Taylors. And I lost my parents. There are few things that are more terrifying for a child than to lose hold of their parents' hands. And you see it in kids, even in completely safe situations, even when you're in sight. I was shopping with one of my kids the other day, and I was in Home Depot going through different bolts trying to find the right ones, and I had a child that kept on pulling a hand down to hang on to it. God wants us to do that with him. To keep reaching out for that hand. See, Jesus holds on to us. And he knew that the way of the cross was the way that he and the Father could hold on to us forever. That he could overcome death for us. That no matter what we face in life, he is holding us in the palm of his hand. And so Jesus invites us to take his hand. To ride out with him into the brokenness, into the desperation, into the hopelessness of this world and our lives. Whatever this world can throw at us, knowing that we have a champion who rides with us hand in hand to overcome everything. I don't know about you, but when faced with things like homelessness, I don't know what to do. But Jesus invites us to put our hand in his and trust him and watch what he'll do.